For everyone who's tuning in, we're here for a very special event that's happening tonight at the venue. We'll be sharing the latest sneaks and updates from the Creative Cloud. So if you do have questions for Scott and myself and all the other guests today, do ask on YouTube and behance.net/live, and I'll make sure to pass those on. So Scott, it's been 12 months since we last saw you in Europe. What has happened in the last year, and where do we start? Please share your own perspective and also what has happened at Adobe.
Okay, the last 12 months. Sometimes I'm like challenging myself to remember all that's happened in the last 12 days.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time. I think certainly the advent of AI has always been brewing. I mean, we've been shipping AI-powered features in our products for, 5+ years. Yeah. Things like neural filters and content-aware fill and After Effects, all these sorts of capabilities. But the emergence of generative AI capabilities, I think, is really exciting. It's also left us with a lot of questions, like how should these models be developed? How should they surface for creative professionals to use? How does this unlock new possibilities for creative professionals? And our team took a very creator-centric approach in bringing some of these capabilities into Photoshop. And everyone saw what we came out with as a version 1 with generative fill just a few weeks ago. Yeah. I think the reception has certainly exceeded our imagination. What people are doing with it, how they're changing their process to incorporate it. But I also think it's demonstrating that generative AI is going to make professionals more powerful. Yeah. It's going to allow them to explore more design space of possibility, play with more possibilities and find, the best ultimate solution for their customer or for their brand or whatever they're building.
Yeah, you're talking about empowerment right now. And I think creative confidence is something that we're seeing come up a lot more in conversations as well, especially with Adobe Express last week. How do you feel that creative confidence is changing in the age of generative AI, for example?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, I think that humans are most confident creatively when they're 5 years old. Yeah. And this is when we're drawing, and everything we draw, our parents will put up on the refrigerator and say how wonderful it is, and teachers will say how brilliant it is. And then, of course, as you get older, you realize that a lot of people around you have skills that you don't have. And you realize that there are critics out there. And suddenly you start to recoil and your creative confidence goes down. And that's why most people don't end up producing creatively throughout their lives in a way that creative professionals do. Yeah. It's exciting now to have technology that allows anyone to visually express themselves, to anyone to take an idea and turn it into something. And so I believe that the creative confidence of humanity is going to go up over time as a result of this new technology. And I think that's good for humanity, especially in the age of AI. We're going to stand out with our ideas more than our productivity. And I also think it's great for pros because pros, of course, have these new superpowers to save time. And if you ask any creative professional how they come up with the best solution, usually they say, hey, I just need more time to explore more possibilities to come up with the best possible solution.
Yeah, and there's a theme of productivity coming in here as well. You often talk about creativity being the newest form of productivity, for example. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I know you've touched on it just now, but a little bit more.
Sure. How have people stood out at work over the last few decades? How have they gotten good grades in school? It's usually because they memorized stuff or they were more productive in doing things faster. And that's why Microsoft products were deployed throughout organizations over the last few decades, because everyone needed to be more productive in order to be successful. And then now we're in a new era where productivity is being achieved through compute. Computers are, and AI in particular, are doing a lot of the productivity driving work for us. And we need to be more creative in order to be more successful in our careers. Yeah. And I think that's widespread and true. And so I think that's good for humanity. And I think that's why I like to say creativity is the new productivity.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit more about collaboration as well. I know that's a topic that'll come up this evening as well, and in the last 12 months, definitely. So tell us a little bit more about your vision of collaboration as well for Adobe.
Well, it's funny. I mean, creativity used to be a real solo sport. You used to work within the file or within the canvas that you were working in in the physical world. And it wasn't like other people were working with you at the same time. Now we're in a world where, first of all, creativity is the competitive advantage of most companies and brands. Whether you're a direct-to-consumer brand or a product or any sort of company these days, you're only as good as your latest content and the story you're telling and how engaging it is. And in such a world where creativity is the competitive advantage, that means that everyone wants to be a stakeholder of creativity. Now that's a little scary for us creative pros that don't want people over our shoulders, looking at what we're doing. We have to adjust and also put some constraints around that. But we want to be able to involve more people in the process. And so that's changed the way we build tools at Adobe. We allow people to share documents that they're working on for real-time review and approval. We acquired a company called Frame.io that allows people to get feedback on their video frame by frame in a really controlled way. And then we're also building new capabilities like multiplayer into Photoshop or into Adobe Express to allow multiple people to be in the same canvas at the same time for certain social media posts and that sort of thing. So I think that future of creativity is more collaborative than ever before, and I'm here for it.
That's great. Let's dive back into generative AI as well. I know there'll be plenty shared by Rufus and Brooke as well after this, so we'll definitely share some of his features. How is Adobe approaching the whole topic as itself of GenAI, and how does it make it easier to explore creative options for creatives and others?
Yeah, I think that we're in the early days.
Yeah.
But generative AI is intended to be a superpower to allow people to explore all kinds of possibilities in much less time. What generative AI doesn't do is it doesn't replace taste, and it doesn't give you ideas, but it lets you explore ideas more quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that we're in the early era where some people are, just playing with the technology right now. But I do think that it's going to become a superpower for the best creative minds in the world to bring the bar of digital experiences up for everyone else. Yeah. It will allow us to make more variants of content and test more ideas. It will allow us to personalize content for more people more quickly. And I see it being a real accelerant to kind of what creative people are capable of.
Yeah. And I think something that you mentioned before is also playfulness and playing. You've mentioned that in an interview previously. I know we have kind of emerging designers often watching Adobe Live. So what's your advice for them within this sphere of also playing and experimenting with generative AI?
Yeah, when I talk to companies and teams and individuals who ask me, wow, this technology is so new and so many implications. How do I even make this work for me? Where do I even begin?
Yeah.
I say four things that start with a P. The first you mentioned is play. Make sure that you play with it. Oftentimes novelty precedes utility in new technologies. And just starting to play with it, I saw, one social feed from an artist who was at first very skeptical of this. And then he started to remove himself from all of his self-portraits.
Yeah.
This is a photographer named Noah Kalina. And suddenly he became kind of fascinated with it. It was interesting to see his process of play. The second thing is to protect the ability to incubate some ideas. If you run a design team, if you are in a creative agency, how do you make sure that you have the permission to have a little exploration zone where you can find new ways of doing things for customers and for clients or for yourself? I would say the third thing is to find an opportunity to pilot this new technology. Find a project where you're going to say, hey, we're going to try this new technology on this project. So a pilot is the third. And then the fourth one is about provoking. Yeah. Provoking difficult questions like, could this be done 10x faster? Or and also like asking questions about the technology itself. We are better because the customers are surfacing questions to us and giving us ideas and giving us feedback. And so I encourage the community to provoke, the questions of how we should work and how it might change, because that's what makes us better.
Completely. And from another angle, I have another P to add to that in the generative AI scene, which is personalization. You've talked about that. So how do you feel that every digital experience will become more personalized? And can you elaborate on that as well for the audience?
Sure. I think about the future world that we're going to live in, and I think that it's going to be far more personalized than we can imagine. I think that websites will greet us by name. I think that instead of us always having to learn how an application works, an application will sort of meet us where we are and help us be successful in the application. I think about a world where we don't have to kind of search anymore for something, but rather we can just ask or get suggestions. And I think that that's an exciting world, where digital experiences are personalized for each of us. But we need to know how they're personalized for each of us. We can't be skeptical of where the data is coming from. There needs to be a lot of transparency around how this content was made and around how it knows who we are.
Yeah, Completely. And let's talk a little bit about 3D as well. I know we've mentioned GenAI so far, but what do you see kind of growing as well with 3D, and what's Adobe's approach on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the 3D and immersive space is one of the most exciting spaces, in our company right now, and it is one of our faster growing businesses as well, because I think 3D used to be this very daunting, scary, kind of math intensive world that most people felt they couldn't play in.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of creative people are realizing now is that it's very approachable. With products like Substance Painter, for example, you don't even know how to design and make the materials and textures to use them in a product like Substance Painter.
Yep.
There's a product called Substance Stager that lets you, instead of trying to make something look real using Photoshop and Illustrator for like a branding deck, you can just bring an asset in the Stager and impose it on like a three-dimensional asset. It works really well with Illustrator.
Yeah.
And you can imagine what products will look like in the three-dimension world without having to know any of that 3D sort of hard tech and how to do it. So it's a very empowering technology. There's some instances where brands have found better, faster, cheaper ways of doing things that they used to have to do photo shoots of. They can render as opposed to photograph. And so it's an exciting new space, especially with the emergence of new devices like the Vision Pro that Apple just released.
Yeah.
We're going to want to create three-dimensional assets and experiences. And so I encourage all creators to start to use this technology to learn how it works, so that when these experiences come online, we can all contribute to them.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot going on right now as well. I know our audience and community is often also looking at what else is happening in the industry and just the creative space in general. So I think there is a shift in creativity as well that is happening. And I know you've mentioned the value of human creativity a little bit earlier on as well, 5-10 minutes ago. Can we also talk a little bit about that and how it's changing the age of AI? Especially, I think, going back to something that you often say, which is creativity that is effective is creativity that moves us.
Yeah. Well, I think that sometimes people confuse content production with creativity.
Yeah.
Just producing or copying and pasting content, it's not what moves us emotionally to buy something, to read something, to think differently. It doesn't change us. Whereas creativity that has emotion behind it, is what makes it effective. And there's a great example. The other day I came across a videographer that I know named Casey Neistat in New York City. He does these famous vlogs, and he did this experiment that all of you can see on YouTube, where basically he had ChatGPT make a whole script with scene directions and lines and everything for this like video blog he did. And he went out and he did it to the T. Everything that the script said he should do, he did. And, he goes to these random places in New York, and he says things like, this is one of my favorite spots to be. It's so mesmerizing and then motivational. And then you see it and it's just like an escalator going down or something, something random. After this video, he looks at his audience on camera and he says, that's the worst video I've ever made in my life. And he said, the reason it was so bad is because it lacked soul. Yeah. And I think that was a really important message that I think a lot of artists and a lot of consumers of content are realizing now. The counterintuitive nature of humanity, the emotion, the edge, the things that move us, the mistakes of the eye that a creative has, or the emotional background, the experiences that makes them come up with something new, that can't be done, and it will never be done by machines.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the premium of human creativity that I think will become even more important in this age where everyone's sort of flooding the zone with content generation from computers.
Yeah. There's definitely this feeling, I think the feedback we often get from the community is this feeling of overwhelming playfulness, but also finding more purpose in it. Yeah. And I think that answers that question. Just one more last note, anything you want to leave the Adobe Live audience with? I know you have the keynote coming up in a couple hours, and we'll have tons of guests coming up as well at Max London. Any last pieces? I know we've had everyone tuning in, so thank you for tuning in. Anything else?
No, that was a good warm-up, and I appreciate the questions, and thanks all of you for tuning in and for asking your questions and making us better as a company. So we appreciate that.
Amazing, thank you so much. So everyone tuning in, we are going to be live. I'm checking the schedule right now with Brooke and Rufus, who are going to share their Adobe Firefly updates. Sorry about that. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.